I dedicate this talk to the love of my life, my husband. This is the hardest thing I have ever done. So I am going to jump to the punchline. Sandy Monaco's boobs. I was 13. It was 8th grade. Tim Butler told me that Sammy Pontilla wanted me to be his girlfriend. And so I was, until Tim Butler told me that Sammy had a new girlfriend, Sandy Monaco. Chosen, Tim said, because unlike me, Sandy had, his words and his motion, boobs, Carrie, boobs. I was hopelessly flat-chested. Puberty had eluded me, as evidenced by my very flat chest. I seemed locked out of the biological sex changes that were happening to all the boys and girls around me. So what were we taught about biological sex? Real easy. There are two sexes, male and female. Sex is determined by our chromosomes, and of course, gender is binary and predictable. I'd like to get very personal for just a moment about my biological sex. Intersex. Intersex is a spectrum between the binaries, comprising 1.7% or more of the world's population, a population that has been historically erased by silence, rendering it invisible, probably to most of you here today. Let's start with what intersex is not. It is not transgender because it's not a gender identity, it's not a sexual orientation, it is not a medical disorder. Most of all, intersex is a biological reality. Intersex people have bodies that do not fit neatly into a male or female category. An embryo becomes intersex by having chromosomes and or genitals or reproductive organs or hormone profiles that don't meet the typical male-female sex binary. We've been taught that there are only two sex chromosome pairs, XX and XY. Only female babies are born with uteruses, and of course, only male babies are born with testes. Not true. Some intersex babies are born with sex chromosome variations other than XX and XY. Other intersex babies have internal gonads, which don't align with their chromosomal sex. And sometimes, an intersex baby is born with ambiguous genitalia. By the 50s, physicians were taking surgical knives to ambiguous genitals as something to be fixed, even when there was nothing functionally wrong with such genitals. And so, cosmetic surgery on the genitals of intersex infants and children became normalized. Take that in. Turns out, that's a reality that I know. Here's what I've learned over the last 2 years. Kept from me by my parents and doctors was the knowledge that anatomically and hormonally, I was different from the typical XX girl and would never go through puberty naturally. What I've learned, I learned that my mother was prescribed methyltestosterone for a menstrual disorder. She was taking it while pregnant with me because back in those days, there was no warning label not to take while pregnant. And testosterone is what initiates an embryo developing into a male rather than a female. Now, the surgical report from my hysterectomy in 2015 shows how much can go really wrong when a female baby swims in androgens. I've learned other things about my body. I was born with a urogenital sinus. That means I have a fused lower vagina and a urethra. So put simply, that means instead of 2 holes down there, I have 1. I also learned that I was born with an enlarged clitoris, and something that was most likely an undeveloped testes. Now, ironically, just 2 weeks after learning that I had insufficient boobery in 8th grade, I underwent late-night surgery for groin pain. allegedly to remove what was described to me as a chocolate cyst. But it turns out, I didn't know in those days, that chocolate cysts, one, aren't emergencies, and two, they're formed from menstrual blood. I hadn't yet had a period. I also awoke with stitches, not just on my abdomen, but between my legs. It is now clear that my surgery was undertaken to surgically remove and surgically downsize my clitoris and remove what was likely an undescended testy. I was subsequently placed on hormones to simulate a menstrual cycle for about 50 years. You'd think the Dark Ages were behind us. They are not. There are only 3 countries on Earth that restrict genital surgeries on infants. There are only 2 hospitals in the United States that restrict such surgeries. And although the UN and the WHO has called out as human rights violations the genital surgeries on intersex children, they remain legal in all 50 states. What do I want you to take away today? Children are being subjected to non-consensual genital surgery for the sole purpose of fixing something that just ain't broken. Intersex children deserve to learn who they are before subjecting them to non-consensual and irreversible genital surgery that causes loss of sensation, pain, as well as shame. So in closing, I'd like you to meet the kid that I was before I was carved and drugged in efforts to make me into a real girl.